morning, good afternoon, good evening. Nations get the government they deserve. I think we in Zimbabwe deserve this corrupt, tyrannical Zanu PF dictatorship, complete with its triple C sidekick. Zimbabwe has been independent for the last 44 years. The country has had the opportunity to end the Zanu PF dictatorship in those 44 years. We cannot keep on pretending that this is somehow an incredibly powerful regime, that we are helpless to end the dictatorship. That is not true. We failed to end the dictatorship because we do not deserve anything better. There is no doubt that this Zanu PF dictatorship is corrupt, incompetent, and other than being able to rig elections, they would have never stayed in power the last 44 years. And as for their incompetence, wow, one has got to only look at the sorry state of the nation's economy. They've been in charge for the last 44 years. We inherited an economy that was robust, and the economy was doing very well, thank you. And after 44 years, you can't believe it. Some of the infrastructure we inherited is in various advanced stages of rot and decay. Corruption has become rampant. A documentary last year, the Al Jazeera documentary on gold mafia, showed that Zimbabwe is losing a staggering 80% of its gold through smuggling. And no doubt the same could be said in diamonds, now lithium, and other resources. The Zanu PF regime's incompetence is well documented. Here is a sample of the kind of leadership we have in Zanu PF.
To ensure optimal money supply and to keep inflation under control. The ZIG is expected to provide a lasting solution to angering inflation expectations, which is critical for sustained price and exchange rate stability in the economy. Given these boundless benefits, I therefore call on the public, the private sectors, you are yourselves in the majority here, including the households, labor and businesses, civic society, and the international community, to fully embrace and support the Zimbabwe gold currency. We have done away with the bond which we had inherited from the time of Rhodesia when it went after declaring UTI. They were given sanctions by the United Nations Security Council. That's why they came with the bond. The bond did not come with Zimbabwe. It came with the Rhodesia. It was a Rhodesia bond, that red note which you used to see. So the board is aware we now have our Zimbabwe currents. We now have our what? Zimbabwe currents supporting.
That was a Vice President Constantino Chiwenga speaking recently at the Zimbabwe International Trade Fair. The guy has no clue what he's talking about. And yet he holds the office of Vice President. One has got to ask again and again, how did we manage to get into this mess? How did such a buffoon manage to be promoted way above his level of competence? And he's not the only one. Zimbabwe's economic meltdown reflects the rot within our government. So if Zanu PF is so incredibly incompetent, then how come we failed to remove them from office? I believe the explanation for that is clear. While the people of Zimbabwe realized in the late 1990s that there was need to have an opposition that will implement reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections, the truth of the matter is we were not so diligent in electing those opposition leaders. We elected individuals who, the minute they got into power, they forgot all about reforms. Completely forgot about the reforms. They began to enjoy themselves. And not even one token reform was implemented. This is a cartoon of someone trying to depict that very problem. In November 2022, Mnangagwa decided to give all MPs and senators $40,000 US, a housing loan, he called it. That only made getting a seat on the gravy train that much sweeter. At the time, people were saying there is no point in the opposition keeping on participating in flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. But that $40,000 US housing loan made that temptation just irresistible. And what the cartoonist is trying to show here is Mnangagwa, the president, sitting, fishing the opposition, and they're fighting each other for those few gravy train seats. Come the 2023, all the opposition parties participated in those elections. Some had been making the usual noise of, we want reforms, we want reforms. Some of them even resuscitated the so-called Nara. From past experience, everyone would have told you Nara is just an organization where some of these opposition parties have a chance to air their views while they're waiting for the elections. Even without one token democratic reform, those opposition leaders were going to contest the 2023 elections. And indeed, the main opposition itself was leading from the front. One of the opposition leaders, Fadzayi, was invited to Geneva to a UN conference of some kind there. That's before the 2023 elections. I believe that the UN had invited her to get a feel of was Zimbabwe ready for free, fair, and credible elections. Because just a few weeks before that, the European Union representative who had participated in the 2018 elections had come up with a report condemning those 2018 elections as a farce. The European Union had a strong delegation that year, 246, plus a lot more people were recruited locally and from the various European embassies in Zimbabwe. And their detailed report condemned why the 2018 elections were not free, fair, and credible. They came up with 23 reform recommendations. And earlier that year, 2023, they had come to assess how many of those 23 reforms had been implemented. And much to their surprise, not even one. And so they'd come up with a damning report to say that Zimbabwe was really not ready to hold free, fair, and credible elections. And so Fadzayi was expected to endorse that position when she went to Geneva. But much to the surprise of anyone who was following the politics of Zimbabwe, she came up with a statement saying that Zanu PF was rigging the elections. Yes, but that is proof that they are fearing Triple C because they know Triple C was going to win those elections. In other words, Triple C was going to participate in those elections regardless of all the evidence that Zanu PF had failed to implement any reforms and was going to rig those elections. Yes, I think one could confidently say that Emerson Mnangagwa, in the cartoon there depicted as the fisherman, had every right to have a snug smile on his face. He knew that Zimbabwe's opposition would find his bait irresistible. I'm surprised by my fellow Zimbabweans out there, how even now, with the benefit of hindsight, they're still refusing to accept that the opposition sold out on reforms, and they've been participating in these flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. It's unbelievable. The evidence is there, but they still refuse to accept it. Opposition leaders themselves, people like David Coulthard, have admitted that these election processes are so flawed, so illegal. The only logical thing really is not to participate. What is the point of participating when you know Zanu PF is rigging those elections and that participating will only give legitimacy to the process? But when you have got such an irresistible bait as an opposition leader, you find it irresistible. All these other considerations are quickly forgotten. What I find annoying is that many ordinary Zimbabweans are conveniently forgetting those political realities. The fact that Zanu PF is rigging these elections. Without reforms, Zanu PF would win the elections. The fact that by participating, you're giving Zanu PF legitimacy. The fact that the opposition are participating out of greed. Nations get the government they deserve. I think the ordinary Zimbabwean out there deserve better. Deserve better from the ruling Zanu PF elite, deserve better from the opposition, and deserve better from the so-called Zimbabwe intellectuals. I think if there is one group that has let the nation of Zimbabwe down, it's the so-called Zimbabwe intellectuals. How is it possible that they've been so silent, silent as a grave? I'll be the first one to admit that we live in a country where anyone who dares to oppose Zanu PF is castigated as a puppet of the West, seeking regime change. If you dare hold the opposition to account for failing to implement the democratic reforms, you will have fire from the opposition supporters and opposition leaders themselves. They are immediately labeled as Zanu PF CIO. Nonetheless, I think when push comes to shove, one is going to accept that the idea that a nation like Zimbabwe, with all our intellectuals out there, to be they failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections for 44 years is an outrage. Particularly when you look at the consequences of that failure. Zimbabwe is a failed state. Millions of Zimbabweans are living in abject poverty. Most of our basic services like education and healthcare have all but collapsed. The nation's future is grim. And yet, we still have this mass of intellectuals. Some of them, they are not in Zimbabwe. And even then, you would think that should give them the freedom to speak. No. They've elected to maintain their silence. Nations get governments they deserve. I think the ordinary Zimbabwean, who is at the coalface of this failed state, deserves a lot better than these Zanu PF thugs have given them, than these opposition sellouts have given them, than the silence as a grave the intellectuals have given them. I'll just finish with another short clip of VP Chiwenga speaking.
Never go back to the colonialists. Neither will it go back to the British. Our land has been united to its people, and the land to its people.
There's no doubt that VP Chiwenga is just a buffoon who was promoted way above his level of competence. And he's not the only one. How is it possible that we have promoted buffoons into positions of power and they've remained there for 44 years? And of course, the whole nation has paid dearly for it. Zanu PF is not going to give up power. But it could have given up power a long time ago. The opposition has had many golden opportunities to implement the reforms, with the best chance coming during the GNU. How the so-called intellectuals can tell me, even now with the benefit of hindsight, they don't know that the primary purpose of the 2008 to 2013 GNU was to implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. Beggars belief. Last year, Chamisa conned his followers to participate in the flawed elections out of greed. He promised them that Triple C was going to win big, that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. His outrageous claims were greeted with the usual silence from the intellectuals. Very few ever questioned the sheer stupidity of that statement. The elections, with the benefit of hindsight, the same intellectuals have kept their peace. They've said nothing. Right now, Chamisa is boasting of reloading and is again gearing to con his followers, 2 million of them from last year's election, to participate in the 2028 elections without a single reform implemented. And no doubt Mnangagwa will see to it that they participate in full. No doubt that the US 40,000 housing allowance for MPs will be retained, if not increased. At the moment, the MPs' space has been improved. Now, they used to get a new car worth $60,000 for the 5-year term. Now, it looks like they get it twice. First 2 years, 2.5 years, and then they get another one. Mnangagwa knows that as long as he has got a bait for the opposition, they will participate, no matter how flawed the process happens to be. I think we need the intellectuals to speak up. They've been quiet for far too long. The ordinary people do not know what is happening here. Most of them are so desperate for change, they will listen to anything. But they don't deserve to be dragged into yet another flawed election only to give Zanu PF legitimacy, only to perpetuate the Zanu PF dictatorship. The idea that 2028 will come and the country will be dragged into another election is unthinkable. And I believe if there is the number one issue for the people of Zimbabwe, it is that the country cannot afford another rigged election in 2028. We are not likely to get any reforms implemented before then. But what we can do is make sure that these elections are not, the people are not conned participating in those flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy again. Our task is to inform the ordinary Zimbabweans that they are being conned, that if they participate again, they will only be giving Zanu PF legitimacy. Chamisa will promise them that he's going to win this time, but that is just another empty promise. We need to remind those people that how many times, as Chamisa told you, he's going to do this, and it never happened. Zimbabwe cannot be an exception to the rule. If we want good governance, we've got to start by having free, fair, and credible elections and leaders who are accountable to the people. This idea, this absurd idea that somehow Zimbabwe can have rigged elections and somehow emerge with a competent government is absurd. Chamisa is selling that just because he doesn't want to admit that he's participating in these flawed elections because he cannot resist the bait Zanu PF is offering him and his colleagues in the opposition. Indeed, Mugabe bribed Nelson Chamisa, Morgan Tsvangirai, and the rest of them during the GNU. And that's why they never implemented even one democratic reform. And ever since, Zanu PF has learned that as long as they allow a few seats, the opposition to win a few seats, they will participate in these flawed elections no matter what. I think we need to be smart enough to realize what's going on here. Thank you very much for listening. We'll go out with another piece of wisdom from the Vice President, Chiwenga.
Never go back to the colonialists. Neither will it go back to the British. Our land has been united to its people, and the land to its people.
That has been Zanu PF's strategy all along, to frighten all of us out of our wits into believing that anyone who seeks free, fair, and credible election must be speaking on behalf of the British. The right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country has nothing to do with the whites, the British, the Americans, or anybody. That is a fundamental right of every human being. And in our case, free, fair, and credible election is the very essence of good governance. If we want good governance, we have got to make sure we've got free, fair, and credible elections. Why that should be seen as that is only somebody in the West would want that, beggars belief. No, the people of Zimbabwe want it. As I said, good governance is a right, and it is at the very heart of our ability to end this nightmare. We cannot pretend that we didn't have the chance to end this dictatorship. We did. And even now, we can still end it if we apply ourselves. By and large, nations get the government they deserve. We certainly deserve this corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical Zanu PF dictatorship, complete with this equally corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless MDC/CCC opposition. Thank you very much for listening, and